real conversations, and some hard truths. Gangs, drugs, and guns. Giving a voice to those willing to sacrifice. We have stories that need to be told. We have lessons that need to be taught. Protect and serve. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. Hey everybody, welcome back. Nathan Romas with you. Today we are going to be talking about policing in the United States, some officer wellness pieces, and my guest's efforts in this field. For that, I have Commander Eric Tung on the show. Commander Tung has been a police officer for 17 years in Washington State. He currently oversees patrol operations and his department's wellness and peer support programs. He's led and innovated programs in a range of fields, so from recruiting to hiring, training and community engagement, civil disturbance, which maybe we'll talk about that, sounds interesting, and field training. He develops wellness and leadership content on Blue Grit Wellness over on Instagram, bluegritwellness.com, and the Blue Grit Radio podcast. And these are focused on bridging police and community, as well as fostering personal and team growth daily. So welcome, Commander Tung.
Thank you, Nathan. Thanks so much for having me. And Eric is great. Eric or Tung, whatever you prefer.
I think the title Commander, that is awesome. We need a rank like that.
Yeah, I've said it before. I don't love it. I mean, it sounds so formal, but I love Sergeant. You can say Sarge, Lieutenant LT. I like being able to have a title that can be kind of casualized, if that's even a word. It probably isn't. But yeah, just to kind of break it down, I like to try to keep it a little bit more casual with my guys. We don't have an extremely formal department culture. And I do think that helps some communication and some relational things. So, but yeah, Commander's a little long. There's no awesome abbreviation for it.
Yeah. Well, you know what? We'll get to talking about you just to start. For people who don't know you or haven't seen any of your content, just tell us a bit about where you're from and how you got into policing in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. So without going too far down the rabbit hole, I grew up in the American South, Tennessee, and then mostly grew up in Washington State. So the Seattle area. Been to Canada numerous times. Great place, great people. But I really got into law enforcement, I suppose, later in my young adulthood. My upbringing was very traditional Chinese American, where there were certain career paths that were very common, medicine, engineering, computer science. And my adolescence, I suppose, was trying those things to try to appease some narratives and some pressures and some expectations of my family. And, well intended for sure, but none of those things really resonated with me. It wasn't until I went to college, University of Washington, where I really had that soul search and wanting to find my purpose. The armed services and uniform personnel type of roles, first responder roles, always resonated with me. I always had an extreme respect for people that did those jobs. I, in a lot of ways, thought it could never be me or just would never be me because of my personality. I was a pretty shy, reserved kid, but also those types of career expectations. But I think really just being in school in Seattle, being an adult, and then seeing a lot of, at that time, which was pretty crazy, mental health issues on the street, a lot of drug abuse, a lot of crimes resulting from that, some violence that I encountered in my neighborhood going to school in Seattle, and then seeing things happen to people, right, where people are literally just trying to go to college and walk home, and it's a violent encounter, or it's very precarious for women to be walking around at night. And I just got so fed up. Like my car got broken into 3 times when I was in school trying to run a painting business. It was just like this junky old vehicle, right? Just trying to help pay for things, and just to see that amount of I suppose hurt and destruction in the neighborhood, I really wanted to do something. And I suppose it was my kind of coming of age in some ways, but being in college and just gaining more confidence to be like, why not, right? Like, why can't I do these things? And so it's really towards the tail end of that. I was kind of wrapping up my studies where I just dove in head first into everything I could learn about policing and firefighting. And so I was buying books. I was trying to find everything I could, which back in 2006, 2007 wasn't nearly the volume of resources that we have now, which is a fortunate thing for today's days with podcasting and everything that you're doing and I'm trying to do too. So really, I was just going down the rabbit hole and then jumping in where I graduated and that spring prior and that summer following, I was just doing the whole gamut of testing, oral boards,
Okay.
what have you. Yeah, trying to figure that out. So that's what really brought me into policing and then just hit the ground running that summer, got hired at the end of July and just been with my department ever since. So it's been 17 years with the same department. It's Kent, Washington. So it's between Seattle, Tacoma, if anyone's familiar.
Hmm.
Moderate sized city is, kind of how I would label it with 170-ish sworn officers.
Okay. But you're up in Washington. I guess, at least from maybe outside perspective, we would think that's probably not very conducive to wanting to go into policing. Like, did you find while you're trying to look into this field, were people kind of being like, "Why would you want to do that?" Or maybe the sentiment out there in society is
Mhm.
anti-police or just not aligned with them. I guess you could say.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll say that a lot of the school systems and yeah, the prevailing politics do lean a bit left in that region. However, when I was coming up, it wasn't for a lack of empathy for police. It was, I think, just a lack of awareness. And so, what I mean by that was,
Hmm.
I didn't have any narratives of like, oh, police are messed up. Why would you want to be a part of that? It was more of, you have a college degree, you want to be a cop? Like, do you even know any cops? And I was like, I literally don't. That's kind of the problem. So, I mean, that does spill into how and why I create so much content that I do, is trying to help people get in and learn what they need to make that information tangible and remove the mysticism on the hiring process. But we can get into that later. Really, it was more of, do you know what you're doing? Like, this is kind
Hmm.
of absurd to a lot of people in my social circles. Whereas it is interesting after I became a cop and I'd connect back with people from high school or whatnot, where even though I was kind of that meek, just, nice guy, got along with everybody, there's a lot of people that said it made sense to them because of how they perceived me to be so caring, helpful, and value driven. So that
Okay.
was always a very positive compliment to receive.
Usually people ask me why I got in, and I'm just like, I watched a lot of Die Hard and Lethal Weapon movies, and that's
Mm,
where I got
mhm.
my policing ideas from. Not that we're out there doing
Yeah,
that.
yeah, which are valid. Those are fantastic. Die Hard is my favorite Christmas movie, and it is a Christmas movie. I'll make the argument there.
There you go.
Um, yeah, but yeah, for me, it was. I ended up loving those things. I ended up loving the action. That's not why I got in. A lot of my buddies did. Right? They're like, well, as soon as you get honest about why you want to be a cop, you want to drive fast, you want the action, you want the adrenaline,
Hmm.
then you'll do better in interviews after the fact, right? But I was like, that really wasn't me. Like, I just got so frustrated with the injustices, and I wanted to do something about, like, literally taking bad people and putting them somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
Putting them in jail and timeout, just making the street safer. I hate bullies. I hated bullies growing up. I never was really susceptible to a lot of bullying, but I think as much as anyone, right? You get picked on or a little bit here and there. But yeah, I mean, they're the bullies of society. And I think that when we can circle back and recognize that, because we all get cynical, we all get tired as cops, but we just think about that kind of rudimentary thing, is that we have so much power, trust, tools,
Mm.
education, legal understanding to deal with these folks, these people that are doing kind of messed up things that most people are very disempowered to do anything about because of the law, because of their training, because of their physical ability, and
Yeah.
so on.
So where you are now, what led you into kind of this wellness sphere? Is it a specific uh, experience or group of experiences that you had, or is it just something that always interests you? So what kind of put you into
Mhm.
this realm of things?
Yeah, when I look back, it built up progressively. And so I talked about how I ended up wanting to do the exciting stuff. Really, when I started policing, I figured I'd be a great detective. I'm pretty analytical. I was always good at academics growing up. And so I thought that that would lend more towards my skill set. However, when I started patrol, I wanted to chase, like I wanted to get in the foot pursuits. And so with that, I made my main goal at the time like canine officer, right? So tracking, and I recognized like I needed to do everything I could, like not just books and studying case law, but I wanted to be the biggest, fastest, strongest like guy I could be. And so I did the deep dive, and I tend to be this way where I'll just go down the rabbit hole, and it was like
Hmm.
every muscle fitness resource, like forums, YouTube at the time was like probably the best place you could get some pretty tangible information that wasn't all like supplement ads. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I learned everything I could. Like I trial by fire and just hit the gym and started doing a lot of different things. And then I really dialed in my nutrition. So that made my progress a lot better and more effective. And so I learned a lot in that, and I became fascinated with everything I could learn as the years continued, right? And that was sleep because my sleep was awful working grapes. Like I never found a great sweet spot, but I found a lot of things that helped and a lot of things that help now, even working like a more day shift or swing shift hours, a lot of things that I can do to reduce stress. And so having the background in fitness, nutrition, self-taught, I suppose, and then sharing that with people that I worked with, it became a real passion of mine that I ended up putting out in social, like my own social media, just as like a hobby. And then come 2019, 2020, those are the times that I suppose nudged me to be more open and put out helpful information, right? And that's where Blue Grit Wellness really started. It was mostly on social media, but it was really just to try to provide helpful information to officers, and also at the same time just share some understanding for folks in the community
Yeah.
because I didn't know any cops growing up. And so when I would share something and my frustrations following George Floyd's death and how most of us are truly trying to do this job for the betterment of other people in society, a lot of people would come out of the woodwork from earlier in my life and say, like, that's awesome what you shared. Can I share that post? And I wish more cops were like this. And my response was always like, at first frustrated because I'm like, more cops are, that's the point. So many cops are like this. And I was like, just because people aren't going to social media, they're not public about it. And a lot of people that I work with, guys and gals, like I hold in the highest esteem. Like they're putting it out so much more than I am, or they're putting in more hours, or they're sacrificing
Mhm.
time for themselves or their family more than I am. And so truly selfless people throughout the region that I personally knew, and then things that I just know throughout the nation and Canada and beyond, the people that are doing the job the right way for the right reasons. So that's really what helped me build momentum and continuing to have these types of conversations.
Very cool. Just doing the promotion process, and they kind of want to know about leadership. I can't
Hmm.
give questions away. So the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but in talking about leadership in there, it's just I always found it's like if I'm good at home and things are set there, and then you go to work and now you don't have to bring that with you, right? You can kind of separate because now you can be more stable, more consistent at work. Well, then if you're
Hmm.
like that, you can then give more to others than you expect to get back, right? So I think that's kind of how I was viewing leadership is I'm giving more than I'm expecting to receive. I don't have to prop myself up. I can help others get to where they need to go. So that's how I've always kind of viewed it, and it sounds like it's touching along the same kind of threads as what you're saying there. So
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And what you said, kind of for me, I think that is a version of, just taking care of others, right? You learn so much on your own, and you can do so much good as an officer, as a constable, as a deputy, or whatnot, right? A detective. But when you take on more ownership in developing other people, not just yourself, I think
mhm,
that's the sauce, right? Like that's when it makes sense for you to be a supervisor because you do have to hang up some of the hat. You can't be out there with your hands in the mix of everything. Of course, there are some great first line supervisors that do a lot of that and they balance their tasks and responsibilities. But for me, that's what prompted me to promote. It was recognizing I've done a lot of things in my career that I truly enjoyed, but I kept finding that the thing that really resonated with me and the thing that I truly enjoyed and I felt the most invested in was when people would come to me or I could help somebody along with something, right? Something I
yeah.
did or mistakes I made I could share and help them go the right direction. I think that's a fantastic way and it aligns with the people first type of leadership philosophy that I think is integral to every amazing leader.
Mhm. So I also wanted to kind of touch on how like just the wellness that you're working on and the officer safety aspect to it because you talk a lot about physical and the mental side,
Hmm.
and I think sometimes people kind of do one but not both.
Yeah.
So, what kind of advice are people coming to you for when it comes to both the physical and mental side? And then we'll kind of maybe get into like the officer safety aspect of that, right? Like being squared away, having your mind right, and
Hmm.
being physically capable to do the job. But what have people kind of been coming to you for in those two different sides of it?
Yeah, so it coming from a lot of different directions. I'm going to try to hit on a couple prongs that come to mind quickly. But one is that, yeah, absolutely, the mental slash emotional side is it works in tandem with the physical, right? And so I think that that's part of my lessons learned. Where going back to canine years, where I was just like, just lift more and lift faster and like do sprints, like just go hard, 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 and then not taking time and not investing the right attention or intention in recovery. And even though most of my career, like I was a nice kid. I got along with everybody. I was part of our peer support through almost my whole career. But it really wasn't until I lost a buddy at work where I was like, "Dang, we need to step this up." And I was a sergeant at the time, and I was like, "Peer support needs to be more than just being available, right? It needs to be proactive and just checking in." And so I had the fortune, and my agency had the fortune of having industry leaders in the region come in to do a series of critical stress debriefs, really showcase. I mean, that wasn't the intent. They were coming in to serve and serve us and take care of us. But for me, it became a model of what a peer support team with some leadership and some logistics and some facilitation could do. And so, because I was a sergeant at the time, I already just determined and went to a boss and I was like, "Hey, we need to build this out more robustly and more um, organizationally, like part of our policy and part of our practice, and really integrate with our culture." So, um, when you ask like what do people come out of the woodwork, the most common thing when I just open it up is how do you find that work life balance? And I heard you kind of say something about stuff at home versus stuff at work. And I think that is the thing is when we're doing enough, and sometimes it's really small, sometimes it's just a little bit every day or every week,
Hmm.
and we start building the routines. How do we get to a point where we can toggle on and off? And the job does require a certain level of compartmentalization, right? Like if I go to a traumatic scene with some kids involved, I can't just be me. I can't, just take off the whole officer hat and be like Eric, or I'm probably going to get emotional, and that may or may not be helpful for the situation.
Yeah.
A lot of times when it's still tactical and the seconds matter, like yeah, that's not the time to start feeling your feelings. That's the time to operate, right? But then later there needs to be that time. It's kind of like the balance of you, you need to give yourself that time and process to metabolize your stress. And that's where I really want to invite people to think broadly, try things. Therapy is not for everybody. Like I've heard enough people say it. I'm an advocate, absolutely, but I don't do it all the time. And I've toggled on and off, right? But fitness is like an absolute for me. And so I do recommend people move in some way. And also, it is, kind of a nod to your earlier point. Like it is critical to your survival and the survival of others if you take your fitness seriously. And that's not
Hmm.
a judgment piece. That's a like a calling up rather than calling out. Like, hey, there's something you could literally do right now after you finish listening to the podcast or while you listen to the podcast that is going to help you be better for yourself, your
Yeah.
family, your job. So, yeah, it's all absolutely integrated. And as long as you're not redlining in one thing or the other, like hyper focusing, they're all going to help each other, right? Investing in your sleep practice is going to help your fitness. It's going to help your stress levels. It's going to help you keep your cool with that really difficult person you're dealing with on a call,
Hmm.
and so on, right? It's all going to help you at home too.
I always kind of equate it to martial arts. So used to do that stuff a long time ago, but
Hmm.
I did it for a number of years, and just it was mostly a mental game. And like any good instructor that I've ever had, it's always like 90% mental, 10 physical. Like yeah, you can be big and strong, but if you're weak in mind, you will not succeed. Like
Yeah.
because everything's a beat down, drag it out kind of thing, and policing is definitely no different than that. So it's like you have to be mentally strong. And that's not saying that, yeah, you were talking about therapy. Maybe that doesn't work for people, but there's a lot of different ways to take care of yourself. But I think how we kind of process information is something that people, I guess, got to learn a little better. For me, again, I kind of always equate certain things that are going on to another situation I have. So if I'm having a tough day, I think like the martial arts, I go back to that and just think, okay, like it's going to be a drag. I got to get through this. I got to go, I got 16 other things I got to do right now or today. So, yeah, it's the mental aspect. I think a lot of people lose that because I guess maybe we're just more visual creatures. So the physical side is certainly easier to pick up on. People think, "Oh, look at that guy, he's huge. I gotta get big in the gym and do all these things," but they forget about all the other stuff they got to take care of. Um, just you said earlier there about the proactive piece. I think that is really good. This is something that many of the guests I've talked to in this space have, I guess this is where their gripe comes in, is their departments aren't doing things proactively. So our service does really good. We have a whole family assistance section. They have certain indicators. So you go to X amount of calls of this call type, or your
Mhm.
use of forces are starting to creep up, or you just go to one traumatic event. Like they read the files, the highlights come in every day, and they're like, "Oh wow, that like we're just going to reach out and talk to those officers that went to this specific event." So when you were kind of starting, did you? I'm guessing your department didn't have anything like that, but it sounds like they're moving toward that proactive side of it.
Yeah, so this was years ago. It was like 6 or 7 years ago when I recognized with some other folks that we could step it up, and my department was doing fantastically in the organic culture of peer support. What I mean to say is that there were things that we could categorically improve, like more specific training, having people that were critical incident stress debrief trained to be facilitators. And then that became where we less formally, but we would see all these events, right? These critical incidents, and then we would do all these debriefs. And we definitely pivoted, that was following a line of duty death, but we pivoted where we probably did too many debriefs, and that's okay, right? We actually started getting feedback of people who were like, "Hey, I'm actually really good," and I know that you
Yeah,
hear like I'm fine, but like I have no stress from this suspect, wrecking out and killing, himself. And that's okay for people to realize that, right? So then we backed it up again, right? And I think that you have to stay adaptable to the needs, but then just realizing a lot of those indicators. I've heard systems like the one you described being like quote unquote early warning systems.
hmm
And I know that there's some emotion or some stigmas attached to that word, right? Probably because certain leaderships and certain organizations have used those ineffectively, right? Where they say, "Oh, you're using a lot of force. Oh, you're getting complaints. Well, we got to watch you because you're messing up," right? Like you're
yeah,
something's gonna
exactly.
happen rather than the, "Hey, are you all good?" I recognize, like, assuming good intent, and a lot of times the people that get the most use of force are the most active. They're not like angry individuals. They're just arresting more people and more people resist them. That's just correlative, right? So a lot of times just going to them and following a critical incident and those types of big calls and just saying, "Hey, are you good?" And if you don't, let me rephrase that. If you do have the culture where that's not weird when somebody on peer support or your boss just says, "Hey, you good? Just checking in,"
Yeah.
then you can say whatever you want, right? Um, where it's not just out of left field. I think that that's the blend of culture and practice, if it's policy type practice, so that people are getting the right intent and they're feeling supported through that.
Yeah, I think too, and not to be cynical or anything, but I think some of it comes down to spending money, and some
Mm,
places don't want to spend money up front. They'd rather take the risk and
mhm.
wait for you to, go 10 years before you have a blowout on in some way, and then try to be like, oh, well, now we'll get you help. I think I see this mostly like with the physical side of things where guys' backs are killing them or their knees are killing them. And like our service, we switch now to where you can actually get suspenders and a padded belt and take care of yourself
Oh, nice.
on the front end of things, right? Rather than waiting for you to blow out your spine and you're on, workers' comp, and now they're
Mhm.
paying a huge bill for you on the flip side of it. So yeah, the
Yeah.
proactive piece is a necessity. And I think I feels like we're kind of in the middle ground of that right now. Because I know there are a lot of places that have nothing, like no options. And then there's places
Mhm.
that are doing some stuff that's a little bit more on the progressive side of it. So yeah, it kind of feels like we're like in a middle place right now, and it's still a lot of education out there and
Yeah.
talking. So
Yeah. I love the example you brought up because even something like giving officers giving them the ability where they don't have to get a doctor's note just to wear suspenders and just take the weight off their hips and like distribute it, right? External carriers for vests, like outer carrier vests. These are all pretty low hanging fruit, which
Yeah.
whether or not you believe it's really that helpful, if you can show your people that you're willing to support them in something they're asking for, which is like not that big a deal, that's huge, right? And I love that example because there's some people that are their heels are dug so deep, but really would they prefer an injury down the line? And some people need, and it's not just like chiefs or sheriffs or administrators, superintendents. It's sometimes it's the city side, right? It's the county, it's the government agencies where they're trying to do their job responsibly, and that's my degree of trying to see things through their eyes, right? Where
Hmm.
they want some data and some tangible information. And sometimes it's even some other government entity. Here in the States, it might be workers' comp, as you mentioned, right? So it's not even my employer anymore saying yay or nay. But if I get injured, they might say, no, you got to do physical therapy. They might be saying that for 6 to 9 months before I get the surgery approved that my primary doc said I needed in the first place.
Yeah.
And that's a frustrating thing. And there's some tools and some resources that are gaining traction as far as other things, but those things cost money, right? And so I get that it's not an easy solution, right? But I do hear what you're saying when you say that it seems like we're in this middle ground. I agree because there are some people that are in the Stone Age where they're not even allowed to work out on duty. Like they'd actually officers being violating policy if if they go to a local playground and do some pull-ups at 3 o'clock in the morning, like they'd be violating policy. If something happened, they'd get written up. I'm like, we need to get past that. We need to, not every agency is going to be able to get, a fitness incentive or credit for a local gym or even a robust gym in the station. I get that money's a thing, but don't prevent people from just trying to do their job better and being healthier and taking care of themselves and their stress. I mean, it seems bonkers to me, but we're
Yeah.
still here.
Yeah. That seems like
Yeah.
it'd be very backwards, but it does exist. So are you within your service, are you like the guru guy? Like are all the people coming to you then for the different levels
I
of advice?
I don't know. That's very uncomfortable. There definitely have through the years there are people that do come to me for different things. I feel most validated, I suppose, and the most purposeful when people come to me for career advice. They might be in
Okay.
my in my direct chain of command. They may not be, but that tells me that I'm doing the right things and I'm putting that right positive, constructive energy out in my agency. I suppose outside the walls, it is a lot. It's hybrid right now, and probably because my job changes and I change what I talk about, right? So when I was in recruiting, that's all I was really talking about, thinking about, writing about, speaking about, in the vein of bringing new cops in. Now that I'm a mid manager, I think a lot about agency development and how do we build organizational culture? How do we build a more healthy culture that incorporates wellness? So a little bit less of the hey, here's what I recommend for a strength program, a little bit more of how do we allow systems and support, themes of wellness in the day-to-day culture of a PD.
Hmm.
It's kind of across the board. I think outside of my walls, outside of the region, I there's an administrator on the East Coast that said, "You're the guru. You're the wellness guru," and they were looking at consulting options, which I took as a huge compliment. I mean, for sure, um, that was very gracious for him to say that, from his perspective and his team. But I think it's a lot of things. And really, if I was going to summarize everything that I'm truly about, it's helping cops be better, just being the best version of themselves. And that's going to make them better cops, better spouses, better partners, better parents,
Hmm.
and better for the community, right? And wellness is a necessary like pillar in that, all the facets of health within that. But then so is mindset, and so is taking accountability and leadership and building character. And so that's really the cross section of everything I'm trying to talk about, which is a lot of things. But I think that's what we need more of, right? We need more personal agency in that.
Do you know, like for your service, because you're a bit of a smaller service than some of the Canadian ones, because up
Hmm.
here it's a lot more centralized. So it's just like
Yeah.
many big ones. But
Hmm.
for ours, we have approximately 2,000 members. But at any given time, I want to say the last numbers I heard in this of going back about a year and a half was at any given time, we have about 10% of our membership off. Now that also includes like pat and mat leave, but a lot in there is, mental health, physical health. There's a lot of reasons that people could be off. So it's like, that's a huge chunk of your workforce. Like if we think 2,000 members, so you get 200 that are gone,
Mhm.
like that's like half of our patrol. Like it's just so
Yeah,
many.
it's a lot.
So do you know like what your numbers are like down there, and how many you might have off at any given time?
Yeah, we're small enough that I know I could count them, and I know their names and faces, which is a fantastic thing about a smaller agency. It's not 10% though.
Okay.
It has wavered through the years, and yeah, the long term OJI or PTS, PTSD, PTSI claims, those have been the most difficult because there are separations, right? They're not in the office. Some people, with an injured knee, they might be in the office doing light duty, which we can check in on them, right? We can continue to engage them with the team. Otherwise, that is challenging when they're outside the building, right? They're at home. You can still check in, but it's not the same. And those, in my experience, have been extremely long term. And I think a lot of that is because of the things we spoke on earlier, which is LNI, workers'
Mhm.
comp, those things that I barely understand the process of them, right? And so it is complicated though. Not quite 10% though.
Yeah, well, and a good point you have there. When people are separated from the work, like they can become very out of sight, out of mind.
Hmm.
And like the odd check-in is good, but it is very hard to keep someone feeling like they're still tethered to the workplace, their friends, their peer group. And I honestly think that just leads to more people staying off longer, I guess.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's just gonna affect their health more. Whereas, as far as I understand on the workers' comp side, like up here, they really try to get you back to work, even if it's light duties. They want you in the building around people, right? You don't wanna
Yeah.
just sit at
Yeah.
home and who knows what you're doing, right? So
Yeah, I love that point, and I think that there's a really constructive theme that everyone should think about from whatever their rank or role is. Because when I was a, I mean, everyone has their bits of cynicism, right? When it gets thicker or thinner through the years, and for sure, when I was a senior officer and then a new supervisor, there were certain administrators that for sure I thought I had them right. Like I thought I had their number as far as how they felt about people. Like I didn't see they weren't demonstrative. They weren't verbose about how they value their people. And so I'm like, man, we need more. We need more inspirational leadership. We need more messaging about how like our work matters because the guys feel so unsupported. And why I bring that up is because the example of someone being on light duty, even if it's limited hours during the week, but I know an administrator that I was like, we need to get them in here. We need to get them helping out. We need to get them in roll call, and even if it's just phone police reports, we need them in here X number of hours a day. And I thought that was kind of a cold, it came from like a cold place. Oh, we need to get more work out of them. But
mhm.
really, now being the mid manager, which like I don't want people to be like, oh, you're going to defend the bosses, but some bosses, are not the greatest bosses. But this is an example where I was outside of that circle of conversation, but I get it now where an executive leader is like, no, because when people are at home, they don't have connection. They don't see their guys. They don't see their buddies. Like we need to keep giving them value and purpose because they do have that. Like just because you're not out in the field doesn't mean you're not helping the team. It doesn't mean you can't like look in all these crime databases and start gathering leads or take a initial report and write it up, package it up for detectives to do the next thing. Like that is what keeps them positive. And I'm like, 100% you're right. Like you
Mhm.
need to have that purpose. And that's where I think that, these points, what comes to mind is something I've been talking about a lot lately, which is identity. And sometimes oftentimes because of the nature of the personalities that come into this job and the nature of the job, it's so prevailing in our lifestyle that we over identify as cops. I'm certainly like I got my hand up, right? Like I'd spend enough time, you certainly do, outside of your full-time or more than full-time job to discuss policing and culture
Yeah.
because it matters. Like I get a lot of value from it personally, and it's part of what makes me better at my job is spending all this time speaking or writing or thinking about it. But it's a lot, right? And so when we grapple with injury, when we grapple with resignation or retirement or what have you, like those are really hard things that have been a more frequent discussion on my podcast or in my content because it's a thing. We got to hang it up one day,
Yeah.
but that's really scary for some.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Well, and maybe on that, one of the things I wanted to ask was just because you're doing some of the frontline things, throughout all the narratives that have gone over the last few years. So when we're talking like COVID, George Floyd, the BLM, what else? I don't know. There's so many things going on. Uh,
Hmm.
how are you kind
Plenty
of,
to choose from.
yeah, how are you kind of going through those periods and keeping spirits up? Like essentially, what was it like in your area for you and your people?
Yeah, it was stressful. It was definitely stressful. I COVID, George Floyd, that overlap, it definitely was very corrosive. It felt as if, although we weren't in Seattle proper, where it was, I mean, I'd say every chance I get, like my hats off and my heart's out for those men and women that are still dealing with extremely difficult circumstances. Like we're commuting distance away, but it is drastically different in our day to day in administrative support, government official support. It's just different. But in the times, it did feel like you're walking into a war zone, and that's proverbial in some ways. But I also, as civil disturbance, I was in riotous situations as well, and so it felt like there was so much pressure and so much hate that I know every reasonable officer, no matter how devoted you were, was questioning your own resolve, because your family's super concerned about you, your friends are super concerned about you. Some family and friends, and I know personally people that their family and friends turned on them, because of the narratives, the prevailing divisive, polarizing narratives on police. I know a young man who he was in academy when George Floyd was killed, and his family is hitting him up saying like, you're just a diversity hire, and you got to get out of there. You can't be part of that." But he knew why he was there. He was there for those narratives to change them, right? And
Mm,
so it's not that we clearly a lot of people prevailed with their mission, their personal mindset and values, and why they're doing this job, but it was hard. It's easier said than done. Um, I was running a patrol group, and it was a pretty young crew, but daily we talked about our best practices and where our minds were at and how we were going to contend with some of these narratives as more restrictive laws, forcing de-escalation and slowing down, and all these things that, I mean, truly, years later, you look back and you knew that, or I know that a lot of our practices were sound. A lot of our practices were based on uh, themes of de-escalation and,
yeah.
don't do things just because you can, do things because you have to and because they're truly, truly necessary, and articulating that. But it did have us rise our game up. But yeah, at the same time, it's just a lot of just, I think that's probably the best way to describe it. Just so much prevailing toxic energy and attitudes where even though we're out there, and COVID was terrifying for a lot of people, and it was, I think if people are honest with themselves, it was terrifying for everyone at the beginning before more information was available, and then people started going their different ways and not trying to say anything about the opinions there, but just to see and remember how divisive people were, even to the fact of your personal choices, and you're out in the community interacting with people, and how many value judgments like individual officers were feeling then. It was just so much to deal with. But I say that, and I paint the landscape that way to remind people that we need to remember our purpose and our why, like our personal why do we do this job. We need to feel really good about it, because that's what's going to carry us and feed our resilience through this. It's something that I recommend people when they are getting ready to hire on, right? When they're just doing their initial interviews and they're asked why they want to be a police officer, why they want to get in law enforcement. I recommend people keep that statement, like take some notes, write it down so they can rehearse and they can verbalize it, right? Like, because
Hmm.
that's actual practice makes perfect. And interviewing is a skill like anything else, but taking that and then filing it away and maybe putting that in their phone, like every year or every 5 years, just put a reminder for yourself and read that again. Because I had a similar, takeaway was writing an email after a really close call. And I wrote, and this was before I was with my now wife or even girlfriend at the time, but this was before all that when I was a young new officer. And I almost got in this wreck that would have probably been life changing had we actually made contact. We narrowly missed each other, me and another cop, from a different agency. I don't even know what city it was. I didn't recognize the car at that speed, but we were in the pursuit and we're all coming on this intersection and it just missed me. Right, I got to the end of the pursuit. That car never made it. I think they just drove on and went back about their day because they probably realized too how close a call it was. Um, but I remember being like writing this email in the middle of the night to two of my closest friends that weren't cops and just saying how much I appreciated their friendship, their brotherhood, their support. I had a really close call, and although it was terrifying, like I just very grateful, but I'm also really grateful to have this job. And one of my buddies actually emailed it to me years later,
Oh yeah.
and he's like, "Hey, remember your why. Remember why you're doing this." And it was from a place of love and care. And he's always been super complimentary to the devotion of service, and those of us that do this job, very appreciative. So I felt like that was such an awesome kind of time capsule type reminder, and so I invite people find a version of that
Mm.
because yeah, it was absolutely it was crappy. It was not fun to go through all that, but we're all stronger from doing it.
I find those all those periods really made policing really take a step back and look at what they're doing, right? And it was a
Mm,
review of policies and procedures and talk about accountability sides of things. There's a lot of changes in the oversight, and even up here in Canada, like all the stuff that started like in the U.S. has an effect up here. Um, I think it made society in general way worse off. I think it made people way more tribal, and you
mhm.
saw like the worst of people out of a lot of things, from low stress things to high stress. But it was like, wow, people are acting crazy out here. I wanted to ask though, being visible minority. So did that have any play in it at all for you? Like, did that ever come up because you're not in the B or the I of BIPOC?
Mm,
So
mhm.
I kind of criticize some of the terminology, and I think it's like
Yeah.
these two matter, and the rest of you are useful when you're useful. And you talked about that where somebody was in the service and they go, their family's like, you're just there, as like whatever a token piece or whatever they want to call it. But I'm wondering, like,
Mhm.
have you had any experiences that lend to one side or the other? Like, what are your views on that?
Yeah. Yeah, I've thought about it a lot through the years, and even growing up, I wanted to distance myself from my race, and I wanted to Americanize. I wanted to be quote unquote average or just normal, as being the son of immigrants. Which I'm almost ashamed of sharing that, but I know that it's a real thing for a lot of people. But I share that because coming into and living in a very diverse area right outside of Seattle, like I never felt weird or like a very big minority, right? And there's plenty of Asian folks in the region, and that contributed towards that. But starting as a new officer, I still wanted to distance myself, right? I didn't want to be a minority hire. I didn't want to be labeled in any way. So I grinded, right? I just did everything I could to show I was a viable, effective team member. But then even when I'd interact with people in public, sometimes it'd be a family of Asian descent. I'm going to a dispute, and people kind of light up and they'd be like, "Oh, are you Vietnamese? Or where are you from?" And I would almost dismiss them, and I'd be like, "Hey, I'm not here to talk about that. We're not talking about me. We're talking about you. Like I got called here." And so again, I share it because my reflection is that someone was offering, essentially a point of connection, and I like kind of swatted it away.
Yeah.
So I invite, when we talk about, DEI, and we talk about, the diversity of our backgrounds or even diversity of thought and just our different, upcomings, right, or coming ups. I suppose like that's my invitation to say like everyone wants humans doing the job, right? Where this is people helping people. That's what the job is. There's just increasingly stressful and complicated situations regarding that. But this might nod for people, whether you're new or whether you're seasoned, like be an individual where you can, right? Be professional, absolutely, but allow yourself to be open to the degree that you feel comfortable with, right? In a very outside of race, I've seen people like get down on a knee and share with someone in crisis, saying that yeah, my son suffers from schizophrenia. Like that officer doesn't have to do that, but does it make him better at his job? Absolutely, right?
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
that empathy and willingness to share that made him extremely effective in that call and so many others, right? So, um, but Yeah, going back to your original question without that tangent, it is interesting, and I've talked to some other Asian American officers, and I do feel like we're kind of in this weird sideline pocket where there is a different narrative and different conversations for Black by indigenous folks or even Hispanic folks in the United States, where Asians are just kind of over here, but there's also a significantly less. There are significantly fewer Asian American officers than those other minority groups. So I don't have a strong opinion. It's just more of my reflection and observation.
Hmm.
But ultimately, another thing that comes to mind is that I feel like people are willing to see you and hear your perspective when they're willing to see you and hear your perspective, right? I've had some ice been broken with people of African American descent with concerns about my officers where I've offered pretty quick. I'm like, well, I only know my experience, my perspective, and that's as an Asian American dude. And I've continued the conversation that way. And I've had that be a fantastic icebreaker in speaking about our different outlooks and how we're never going to have the same outlook because we didn't grow up the same way or have the same experiences. And that's just a fact. I've also had the experiences where me and my Black officer right next to me are all being called crackers and a lot of terrible racist names, right? So I think it's when people are willing to be there. The thing is, we have to remember is that we can't take it personally. It's hard not to sometimes, but we are the professionals, right? We're law enforcement professionals.
Hmm.
It's our literal job, and it's our sworn duty to do the best we can, and kind of separate that. Whereas people at a protest, people, angrily at a call. I mean, that's not their job. They choose to be however they're going to be, and we can choose to be however we want to be too. And we just need to be better.
Yeah. No, I think those are all very valid points, and I think a lot of it just comes down to culture, and I think that's why some people are might succeed at something or not. But yeah, I find it interesting. It just felt like the world was kind of going away from that. I know where I grew up, it was very multicultural. It was like
Mhm.
all my friends are very different. Every single one is from a different background, different race. Half of them were from different countries, and then it all of a sudden we get to this period, and it was like you belong to this group, you belong to this group, and I was like, that's we're setting ourselves back here.
Yeah.
But I guess that kind of moves me on to I want to talk about your podcast and just some of the things you're doing here out in the public realm of things. So the Blue Grit Radio, what was the inspiration behind the name? And can you talk a bit about just how that show came to be and when did you start it?
Yeah.
How far back was this?
Yeah, I believe I started the podcast about 2.5 years ago. And really the Blue Grit name, whether, Blue Grit Wellness and the website and on, it comes from, play on True Grit and, loving that the Western movies, those stories of kind of the underdog and also just these stories of resolve. But a play on True Grit, blue being police, but then grit being more of a Angela Duckworth's book and description or definition, which is it's less about the image of being tough, and we have that callous, tough, I suppose, stereotype of law enforcement from years ago. But I like focusing on the amount of resilience and determination that you can associate, and we should associate with grit. And so I think that's just such a quality that is something that we all have to do this job, and it's something that we absolutely can and should invest in building. And so that's in all walks of health because they're all going to help us be better. Um, it really started the podcast specifically because I wanted to reach a different audience. Utilize this amazing tool to do more long form conversations. A lot of that was in the heyday or the start of us doing a new different full press recruiting effort. And my recruiter and I, like, man, he was like instrumental in my success as a hiring sergeant. But just being on board and willing to try things, and we felt very comfortable having a candid conversation with someone that was interested in a time that I said it and I wrote it and I believed it, but I thought it was the most impossible time to hire and retain people in the job. 2021,
Hmm.
2022, but just being able to file that away and refuse victimhood and then just say we're going to we're going to go down swinging. We're going to try everything in the book, everything we can think of, and no excuses. We're just going to go. And podcasting was one of them, right? So essentially just starting the podcast in alignment with my social media that I was already doing, and having these really organic conversations about our purpose, and also tips for people so they could get better at interviewing, because I got better through trial and error, and I could save them the time, right? I can share those lessons, and the the topics and the themes just really they correlate and they align with everything that I write about, or everything I post about in the content, right? So it's all about building better cops, better community. Sometimes there is a bit of community relational things, and it's bringing people in, hearing their story, their background, because their story is going to resonate with so many people in a different way, because we're all different. We all come into this for different reasons. We all do different things with a career, but then the intersection of essentially health, wellness, leadership, and that starts with leadership of ourselves. So that's a big tenet that I'm fixating on, and I'm trying to help people recognize, like, these are all absolutely intertwined.
Yeah. Is there anybody that really stands out from maybe just at the start of it all, like somebody that really got you into this, or like kind of pushed that idea for you, especially on the communication side?
Yeah, I'll say, like, shout out to one of my prior bosses. He's now an assistant chief under my department, but Andy Grove, he was my boss in recruiting, and that just as a personal mentor, he was very instrumental in I suppose supporting self belief. I think oftentimes high achievers are some of their own worst critics, right? I've even written about
Yeah.
imposter syndrome, for Police One, in reflection of that, and I fall victim to that. But he's such a great idea guy, and a pusher, and a positive thinker. At work, outside of work, that he's huge. And then we're talking about our mutual friend Mark Bouchard, and I think early on in getting in social media, and it's uncomfortable, right? I'm an introvert, and to do all these things are not common. It's not common to put your voice out there, or to be public as an officer, but to get validation from a guy that lives hours and hours away, right, in a different country, and doing his thing and writing his book, setting my sights on stigma.
Mhm.
And that was when he was working on his book, and I was working on some ideas. Uh, we had some phone conversations, and just to find that alignment in this similar thought and ideology of officer wellness and leadership, I think that it really grounded me, and it also really supported me. Like, it's very validating to hear that something I'm doing is resonated with someone so far away. And so maybe it's you're primed because we're talking about it, or about Mark specifically. But shout out to Mark. I mean, he was the one that nudged me to come on this show or reach out to you, and I'm so glad I did, because again, it's that, like, hey, our problems are not unique, our solutions are not unique.
Mhm.
I mean, they are absolutely going to be built upon sharing with others, right? Building that community, and thankful to technology, but as as much negativity social media can bring, like, I like focusing on the positivity, because I spend so much dang time on there.
Yeah.
But
There's not enough out there.
yeah, building this connection, yeah, it's huge. Like, what a fascinating time to be able to connect on police issues, and really how people can improve themselves and their society or their communities, using platforms like this.
Yeah, and you mentioned a bit earlier, like, so when we're talking about podcasting, I always kind of thought of it as or very similar to police interviewing.
Mm,
So it's letting people tell their story, right? Go in there. Not that I'm using silence on people, but it's like you let them fill the time, and you ask them the open questions, right? And tell, explain, describe, get them talking, and then open ended questions, closed ended questions. And it's a lot of rapport building. So it's just having people in, just having good conversation, and you can learn so much about whatever it is you want to learn about. One of the coolest things I've done is reaching out to people around the world. So the same thing you're talking about. I mean,
mhm,
I've had police on from Australia. I was talking to one guy about geopolitics side of things, but he was in Africa, he's in Ghana. Just super cool conversations. But in those convos, you're finding so many similarities. You're like, this person's halfway around the world dealing with, you know, it doesn't even sound like issues I would ever fathom dealing with, but they handle them pretty much the same way I might handle stuff. Or
mhm,
we are seeing people or issues in a similar way. So yeah, it's just very cool. Like the doors that it opens, and the people you can actually be put in contact with. I've said it many times, is like I would have no business talking to half the people I've talked to, but just because of this platform, now I have a reason to reach out to them and we have a reason to connect. So yeah, it's opened a ton of doors that I would have never thought possible in like any other life. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, you being able to reach so many people, and then also not just your personal reflection and takeaways, but like you're scaling that. And I think that that's something I'm so grateful for in this project and, this passion project pursuit, which is that being able to share someone's story, like it's not just my benefit, where you're absolutely right. I think what I hear in that is I'm meeting and talking to officers that I would have never met. I'm really getting to know them on a pretty intimate level. Like we're sharing, by the time we have a couple conversations, it's like multiple hours. And I haven't talked to, a lot of my acquaintances or people at work for multiple hours necessarily, depending on, whether we work directly together or not, or to be able to pick someone's brain that I highly respect and how they do the job and how I've been watching their career unfold, having them share lessons. I'm receiving this mentorship, but then I'm also sharing some of my own insight, and we're scaling that mentorship for who knows how many people. And so I think that that's just such a remarkable ability we're able to do that these days.
Yeah. I think I said it in my promotion interview too at one point where I go, uh, in like 2 years of podcasting, I've learned more than I've learned in like 10 years of policing.
Mm,
So, but
yeah.
I'm talking to people that are just insanely successful in whatever it is that they're doing. And they've gone through some very intense experiences with that. So
Hmm.
it's just like you're learning lessons at, yeah, like you're saying, like it's just tenfold. You're scaling that like crazy and it's fast. So yeah, I think it's a growing area. Keep doing what you're doing because I listen in and I like the shows and learn a lot from them. Just that kind of, we're coming up to the end of our time. I wanted to find out, is there any new stuff coming out, or do you have any other projects in mind, or is it kind of status quo for right now? So where are you at?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a few things. And so although I've been out of recruiting for a year and a half, that's a continual audience, right? There's young folks coming in, and maybe it's because I share so candidly, and it is really validating. I mean, it's super exciting. So um, there's a couple things I'm working on. One is our online courses that you can purchase on Blue Grit Wellness. So depending on when this airs, the first course, Get Gritty, is essentially highlighting how we can do all the things we're talking about, how we can up level ourselves, our day to day, enhance this, this balance, this tedious balance of work life, so that we can get there, right? We can be better at home, better at work, and really diving into how you can help build your own habits. It's a lot of what people ask about, and so building a course for that so people can self-pace with my talking head on the video and get some feedback there. Also hiring, right? So that's a thing that you're talking about. Promotional interviews, there's a skill, there's an art and a science. Same with entry level testing. So really just breaking that down for folks so they can get it really tangible, really affordable, and they can take that and then just go crush their process rather than what a lot of people do, which is they completely swing and miss on their first few until they start figuring out what people are looking for. Like, just polish yourself up and be your best version of yourself, and then go crush the hiring process, because we need you out here. We need you doing the job. So any
Yeah,
way I can help that, it's always about how I can be helpful, and a lot of that comes from Q&A. So I do love it when people reach out with their ideas or their questions, whether on Instagram, email, what have you.
awesome. Well, I want to say thanks for being on the show today. Hang on for 2 seconds. I'll say bye offline, and I will get all the links up. So I just want to remind people to comment, like, and share all the stuff for Blue Grit as well as the Quiet Professional. So thank you for listening in.